Mentioned that Barb Butler is still in the Gettysburg Hospital, but she's doing very well. But so she's sort of just waiting for an opportunity to get to go to rehab somewhere. But so she's very tired, but doing well. It was a long, slow road where the Hebrew people were going. They were hungry. They were thirsty, and where exactly were they going to? Nobody knew exactly. Their guide plainly admitted that he didn't know the way. So what did they come out into this desert for? To die? Were all the Hebrew people going to die together out in the wilderness because of some harebrained quest that Moses had talked them into? You can imagine the feelings of the people as they traveled further and further into the wilderness. They were hungry and thirsty, and it didn't seem like this bad experience was ever going to end. They weren't thinking of any promised land anymore. They were just worrying about how to get through the day. And so they started speaking against God and against Moses, God's servant. Why have you brought us out of Egypt to die in this wilderness? The Hebrew people were on their way to the promised land. But the way was more difficult than they expected. And on the way, the people lost sight of the promised land. They forgot what their goal was and started focusing on the difficulties that they were experiencing on the way. They started focusing on their difficulties rather than the promise. And so they started speaking against God and against Moses. We all get discouraged at times, whether in our personal lives or even at church. You make plans on how you want your life to go, or how you want the church to be. You sort of figure out what your idea of the promised land is going to be, and then you travel along the road of life, and you run into all kinds of obstacles to your plans and expectations. Maybe it would have cost too much to start your own business like you dreamed. Or maybe the competition was too brutal. Maybe that girl or guy didn't want to get married after all. Or maybe houses were more difficult to buy than you imagined. And your dreams of the promised land weren't realized. And so you start to grumble against God that everything hasn't gone just like you planned it. And you start to focus on the problems and disappointments in your life. And you lose sight of the promise, the real promise that God made to you. You lose sight of the real promised land. Sometimes we feel like it ought to be a bit easier because we are Christian, because we're people of God. And yet, it seems like we get the same problems as those who don't try to follow Jesus. We still get to experience unemployment and the negatives of a down economy. We still have strife or conflict in our extended families. We still have medical issues and the crises that affect many people. And sometimes the snakes of envy and greed and pride, sometimes they do come to bite you. And they can poison every aspect of your life. Your thoughts, your relationships, your self-respect. But God has lifted up Jesus before your eyes on the cross and risen from the tomb. God lifts up Jesus so that you may see what God's vision of the true promised land is. So what is the promised land that God has promised us through Jesus? What is the promised land that Jesus has set before us? What God has promised you and me through Jesus is that God would be a part of your life every day. You will never be utterly alone in this life. And God will guide you. God will open pathways in your life that you never knew were there before. God will surround you with wise and caring advisors in the church and even in the world. And no matter what issues COVID may throw into your life, Jesus will show you how to overcome them. Jesus will show you how to work through the losses and all of the challenges. And as you learn from Jesus, you will learn what it means to have inner strength and yet remain humble. As a disciple of Jesus, you will learn to control your temper and your tongue, although you will naturally fail once in a while. You will learn to listen with greater understanding and with greater insight, because you are trying to follow God's ways rather than your own ways. For instance, you may not get to have all of the things that you dreamed for your life. You may not get the biggest house. You may not get to own your own company and tell everyone else what to do. You may not get to fly all over the world. But God will give you the resources that you need to have a decent life. God will give you a caring heart so that your life is filled with love of your family and friends and the respect of your co-workers and neighbors. And if you choose, you can develop a personal, intimate relationship with the Master, who created every aspect of this wondrous and amazing creation. Of course, along with these blessings and other blessings of generosity and inner peace, God will give you certain challenges in which to serve God. God will ask you to help and guide the mission of the church. And sometimes God will ask you to act with courage in situations that you might rather have avoided. In short, the Promised Land looks a lot like everyday life. But it is a life where God is constantly pouring God's blessings of love and grace and joy and peace into your life and through your life into the lives of others. The Promised Land is that abundant life with Jesus in this day and in the days to come. The true Promised Land is living with Jesus and living the life of Jesus, both now and forever.